So now, without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce today's first speaker, Dan Delaney, Senior Research Director with Ipsos's User Experience team. Dan, you have the floor.
Thanks. And thank you all for spending time with Megan and me today as we talk about voice. So voice isn't really new. It's evolved from navigating phone trees and checking with the airlines for flight status to now getting directions in your car and having your own DJ to serve up music at home. But over the last 4 to 5 years, voice has moved from that sort of call and response type of interaction to something almost verging on the conversational through programmed interactions of things like Google Actions and Alexa skills. And now there's hundreds of thousands of them. More and more companies are investing in voice technology in the hope of enhancing the customer experience and also creating more efficiencies. But how successfully voice fits into your customer ecosystem is going to rely in part on understanding the experience from the user's point of view. Now, building voice, into your 5-year plan, requires acknowledging that advances are making voice a more common and even expected interface. So it does have a role to play, but why voice? Well, it's an interesting fact is the average person types at 40 words per minute, but speaks at 130 words per minute. Just think of that. That makes it convenient, makes it efficient, and it makes voice becoming more and more intuitive, and it does provide customers as a result with an easier access point to address common issues and needs. It's a lot easier to ask for help than to type for help. And, it also can enhance customer discovery of new resources. It can provide like a guide that could reveal aspects of your technology or your ecosystem that you've created that, can result in a richer user experience, customer experience. So how and where should you incorporate voice? Well, in terms of how, voice is different and it will require learning how to apply it and shape it. So, if you're a client, on the client side, start or continue to build voice experience through Alexa skills and Google Actions. It's different. It's a different interface, and there's nothing like actually working with it. In terms of how to use it, perform a needs assessment. Voice is an interface. It's a tool. It needs to. It's not there to be. It's not voice for voice's sake. It should be used to more efficiently meet customer needs, and it can. So identify where voice addresses a business case. And in a few minutes, we're going to share how US Bank and BBC are using voice to advance their business cases and goals. So it's a means to an end, not an end in itself. And in terms of how to use it, well, put yourself in the customer's shoes. They expect great UX. Envision the transaction that you want to accomplish. And go beyond the dispensing of information, which is important and it's a first step. But as you'll see, there's a lot of potential there. And it also, in terms of how to use voice, think of it, the experience it provides. It needs to feel great. More than 50% of perception comes from that front end part of the experience. So, and UX, means great engagement. Now, UX does have a very important role to play in making voice usable, but let's take a step back and ask, what do we mean by an invisible interface? With voice, there's no mouse, there's no buttons, there's no clicking, and often there's no screen. It's hands-free, so you can interact with your hands while your hands are busy cooking or driving or even using a laptop to create a spreadsheet. It also lacks affordances, which in the language of UX, affordances are the parts of an interface that tell you what a system can do. And we are so used to visual, indicators and affordances to guide us, through our use of technology. Now, of course, there's hybrid systems with both voice and screen, from Waze to your smartphone to the Echo Show device. But in most interactions, voice is, in essence, an invisible interface. So as consumers continue to be taught and to be understood by their devices, we're going to really need to apply what we call design principles, just as we do with visual interfaces, to ensure that we meet their expectations, to make it more intuitive, and just for the tech to just work. And this means looking at the experience from the user's point of view, and addressing how key influences are addressed. This is really important. Influences like context. Context is incredibly important for voice interfaces because verbal communication is often significantly influenced by where the user happens to be and the situation that they're in. Just think of the difference between a voice interface in your car and a voice interface on a wearable that you might be wearing in public. It's also important to understand the intention that the user has. By understanding what the user wants to accomplish through the use of the agent, putting yourself in that headspace will be really important to help shape that experience that you want to create. And on the flip side of that is, what's their expectation? How does the user presume the assistant's going to help? All those come together to sort of shape that user experience in a way that's really different from a normally kind of visually based interaction. And so all of these do need to be considered when shaping the experience that this invisible interface provides. It's just to make sure that it's useful, that it's usable, that it's easy to use, and it's enjoyable. So voice does have a role to play in your digital ecosystem. People's digital lives are beginning to include more and more voice interactions because they're convenient. They can be simple and they work. And from our work, and we've been working in this space, for more than 5 years with voice, less than 5 years ago, research showed that people felt self-conscious talking to a device in public. But that behavior has become normalized. With voice becoming more and more conversational, the opportunities to simplify customers' lives in terms of service and search and content and commerce really open up. And COVID, has had an impact on voice technology. And one of the effects of COVID is it's creating new experiences with technology that provide solutions to users who need them. And a great example is for seniors during the COVID lockdown, Alexa has proven to be a really valuable friend. A little side story here. At a group of California senior living centers run by the nonprofit Eschaton, voice technology use is up among seniors looking to fend off loneliness while outside visitors and even internal activities have been curtailed. So Eschaton started providing Amazon Echo devices in residents' rooms just as part of a technology initiative. And they were surprised that during COVID how quickly the use of them took off. Nearly 100% of the residents of one of their big communities began using the devices. And as they thought about it, the directors at Eschaton thought it made perfect sense. In terms of accessibility, it leveraged the skills that all of the residents had, which is the ability to talk. And it provided an interface that was not only accessible, but it also counteracted the fog of loneliness that was created by COVID, and by providing in its own way sort of a touch of humanity. So, and they found interestingly that the residents actually got better at using Alexa the more they interacted with her. And as they learned to interact with Alexa, the directors saw that these residents got the sense that Alexa was understanding them. So it was this kind of virtuous circle that triggered more and more use. So that's just an aside. But in general, we think that, social distancing can be an accelerator of tech reliance and adoption to act as an agent of change. And we talked about this in a webinar that we had in March. And we thought that social distance isn't necessarily creating innovation, but it's speeding the adoption and application of technologies in new and relevant ways. And as a result, it's introduced the relevance of voice technology, to new user segments like the residents at the Eschaton communities. And it's actually more overtly helped in this time of pandemic crisis. For example, both the CDC and the Mayo Clinic have created tools using Alexa for users to assess their symptoms and check their risk levels for COVID-19 at home. Alexa will ask a series of questions about symptoms and travel history, and based on those responses, Alexa provides CDC guidance based on the user's risk level. In a sort of a parallel universe, Google's also launched a rapid response virtual agent. And in terms of an application of that, the Oklahoma Employment Security Commission has used the virtual agent's voice interface to help field over 60,000 daily calls related to unemployment claims. So these are sort of use cases ripped from the headlines, so to speak. Now, China has probably been the most active in marshaling voice to address situations created by COVID. They've deployed a voice robot that can make 200 calls in 5 minutes. And that's compared to maybe the 2 or 3 hours that it would normally take manually. And this robot, with a voice interface, can collect and check personal information like identity, health condition, whereabouts, like where are they now, where have they currently been, or they recently been. And the voice bot is then able to figure out when users should stay home. It provides them with instructions and advice and supports resources, provides them with support resources while they also forward their health status data to healthcare providers. So it's a really advanced use of a voice interface. And China has also introduced voice-controlled elevators with all the concern about surfaces and touch that COVID has generated. So in this case, the users just simply speak the floor that they want to go to, and instead of touching the elevator buttons, it gives a sense of stopping the spread of the virus, but also just concern about picking up the virus by touching surfaces. And finally, for entertainment and education purposes, Chinese tech companies like Baidu and Xiaomi are donating thousands of smart speaker devices to support voice-first entertainment and educational content, as parents now find themselves, as we are here, in terms of acting as full-time caregivers, also employees, and even homeschool teachers. So as working from home becomes part of the new normal, so might this increased usage of smart speaker devices, whether for entertainment or education, or even the purposes of boosting productivity.
So you may be asking why now is the time to spend time developing voice in your product planning. And right now, what we're really seeing is this convergence of 3 elements that indicate a near future critical mass of usage and adoption. So voice is a trend that has been building year after year. It's a technology born from the advances in speech recognition, artificial intelligence, and processing power, and it's an emerging behavior driven in part by interactions with our smartphones. So first, let's talk about a few data points that show why voice technology is a trend. It's predicted that by 2023, there will be 8 billion digital voice assistants in use. And additionally, nearly 90 million US adults have smart speakers, which means that adoption now exceeds 1/3 of consumers. That alone is just mind-boggling from where we were 5 years ago. And potentially most compelling in the US, drivers who use voice assistants in their car have hit nearly 130 million as of January 2020, seeing a 13.7% increase increase between September 2018 and January 2020. So rapid growth there, as you can tell. And these examples are just a few that demonstrate that voice assistants have become a part of everyday life, and they're here to stay. Secondly, voice technology is in a state of evolution, not revolution. What do we mean by that? People are using more and more skills on new types of devices. So just to give you a sense of what that landscape looks like, there are currently more than 100,000 Alexa-compatible smart home products from more than 9,500 brands, and that's growing daily, it seems. There are also more than 100,000 Alexa skills. Google Assistant is accessible on Android phones and smart speakers, smartwatches, headphones, and many other products with over 1,000 different compatible brands. And there's also a lot of excitement brewing about the new Google Nest smart speaker set to release literally any day now, but there's a set press event on September 30th, so I'm eagerly awaiting this. The new device is speculated to be a music-focused speaker designed to take on competitors such as the Sonos One and the Amazon Echo Studio. So we see capabilities of these assistants evolving alongside of hardware and entire ecosystems of devices that they're compatible with. And as we'll discuss more in just a bit, voice technology potential reaches far beyond smart speakers. So APIs, application programming interfaces, allow voice commands in cars, tools, appliances, factories, retail stores, wearables, and any device or technology where hands-free service makes sense. We want to introduce some foundational voice concepts to help you get the lay of the land. So bear with me here. What we've really seen is even for companies that we've worked with who have integrated voice into their product strategy, the technical and technological aspects of this can get a little complex. But knowing some of the basics of the voice landscape will not only help you be more familiar, but will also allow you to focus your time on strategy and development as you think about where voice fits in for your organization. So to start, knowing the terminology and speaking the language of voice designers makes a huge difference, and we have seen this firsthand. In terms of making an impact with your product, in terms of actually taking research data and turning it into actionable progress with your product, knowing the terminology and the language is a huge pillar of it. So let's start with skills and actions. Skills and actions are like voice apps for Alexa or Google Assistant. They let your customers use their voices to perform everyday tasks that they might currently do on a mobile app or a website using either Alexa or Google Assistant. So I always say that it's helpful to think about skills and actions in the same kind of framework that you might think about developing an app. Utterance is the spoken word, statement, or vocal sound. And golden utterances, which is a term coined by Alexa developers, route the user to a specific skill or action using an invocation phrase. So an example of utterance would be me saying, Alexa, play The Chain by Fleetwood Mac, which would then allow her to determine my intent, playing a specific song via my preferred music app. When we refer to natural language processing, or more commonly NLP in voice, we're concerned with the interactions between computers and human natural languages, and in particular, how to program computers to process and analyze large amounts of natural language data. So there are some challenges here, and in particular, in natural language processing, it frequently involves speech recognition, natural language understanding, and natural language generation. The way this works is voice assistants generally transcribe the user's spoken word on the back end into text that they can read. And this is referred to as automated speech recognition, or ASR. Natural language understanding, or NLU, is what takes that back end text from a voice input and determines its intent. So for example, does the user want to check their account? Do they want to order food? Do they want to listen to music? And this all comes together in taking a closer look at what a conversational interface is. Conversational interfaces emulate a conversation with a real human. So historically, computers have relied on text-based user interfaces and graphical user interfaces. So for example, a user pressing a back button on a keyboard, and then the computer reading that as the user's desired action into the commands that it understands. But conversational user interfaces, or CUIs, Provide the opportunity for the user to communicate with the computer in their natural language. This is really the end goal of voice right now. To do this, conversational interfaces use natural language processing, NLP, to allow computers to understand, analyze, and create meaning from human language. So unlike word processors, NLP uses the structure of human language, and that is really the key takeaway of this slide. Words make phrases. Phrases make sentences which convey idea or intent. And really, when you think about it, the ambiguous nature of human language makes it incredibly difficult for a machine to always correctly interpret the user's requests, which is why we have seen a shift towards natural language understanding. Voice is becoming an emerging behavior as it proves itself by moving into more involved activities, building user confidence, removing reluctance, and creating habit. The user experience will influence the individual's progression from convenience to complex activities. And as a result, user engagement is progressing from entertainment to information and convenience. Continuing advancements in voice technology are opening up the door to more complex activities. User progression into these new areas will rely on greater user experience that addresses awareness, usability, and utility to increase the potential for adoption. So voice assistants are also being integrated into new form factors. And this is something that we as a team have been very, very excited about. So you are no longer restricted to developing skills or actions that only work with smartphones or stationary smart home speakers. Some examples of the areas that voice assistants are really integrating right now are wearables. So think about smartwatches or headphones or glasses. You may even be wearing one right now. Automotive, so thinking about in-car assistant experiences and support, smart homes, so everything from doorbells to light switches and appliances, and potentially most exciting is the idea of smart cities, and this was all over CES this year. So a smart city is a concept being rapidly developed and discussed in both the tech and urban planning industries, and is ultimately an urban area developed with specific technology and communications in mind. So smart cities would use different types of electronic methods and sensors to collect data to help the city run more efficiently. And as you can imagine, this has a ton of potential positive outcomes for the environment, for safety, for transportation. The list goes on and on. And we can anticipate that voice will play a key role in many of these experiences.
So there is a tidal shift that's occurring in the relationship between users and their machines. And this is going to really propel the adoption of voice interfaces. Well, we see this in the increased engagement with voice and in the comfort in its use that, among millennials and Gen Z users, along with the expectation that its advancement is going to be rapid. This creates a high bar for the experience to perform and to work as expected. And this makes usability research a really a key pillar in pushing a voice product forward. Now, what do we mean by this relationship between users and machines? Well, machines are beginning to understand and operate in human terms. And voice is the clearest example. Up until now, it's been up to the user to learn and adapt to the UI. And Megan referred to some of that as she was going through the vocabulary. You hit the back button, you do this, you basically learn how the system, how to guide the system through interacting with it. And that's really been our interaction with technology, forever. And we still do that. That's primarily what happens in most of our interactions. But software experiencers are now starting to reflect the shift in tech towards machines understanding, anticipating, and operating on human terms. And in this case, using our language and conversing with us. Just think of Siri or Alexa or whoever, providing anticipating what your needs are and serving up something based on the time you always do it, or something like that. This anticipatory thing does reflect this new interaction between where machines are anticipating us. And that, as this gets refined, it builds expectations in terms of the experience. So advancing natural language processing, what Megan just was explaining, is making interactions even more conversational and voice more prevalent. So it's coming, and you'll see as we walk through some of the use cases and case studies. It's important for us as voice practitioners and voice users to develop sort of new design guidelines, new design heuristics for voice interaction, to understand them and to apply them. And voice really is an invisible interface. So many users can have a really hard time understanding its potential. So that's a big challenge for all of us to show what's possible there, because it's invisible. There's no affordances we talked about earlier, and yet the potential is huge. And as Megan alluded to, users would really like to use voice for more complex tasks, but they often lack the confidence. We have to give them sort of guidelines, training wheels. We have to guide things so that they can more intuitively understand, what is possible. And that's where tending to the user experience is going to play a big role. They're interested in booking medical appointments, requesting hotel amenities, grocery and delivery, things that are frankly being stimulated by the current pandemic lockdown that we're under, so that there's a really opportunity to begin making those potentially complex tasks more intuitive through voice. Now, I'm going to turn to some case studies that demonstrate voice use cases, but also the pace of change that voice is undergoing, because it's happening, and it may not appear from the outside, but it is. And in terms, pardon me, in terms of the big voice players, fintech has been one of the most active in adopting voice as an interface. And US Bank is probably one of the best examples of the role voice can play, but also what's out there, what we're moving towards. In July, they launched a mobile app voice assistant that was basically built to mimic human bank tellers. So that the US Bank Smart Assistant, it allows users to carry out their banking requests using conversational language, like Megan was describing in the vocabulary, and it actually it feels like you're talking to a person in terms of that feedback, that back and forth. And as we talk about conversational interfaces, that's what we're talking about. It feels like the give and take of talking to a real person. It's embedded in the US Bank Android and iOS app. There's no wake word. The AI just starts listening when the user taps the microphone button in the app. And it does things like carries out transactions and transfers, pulls up bills and spending history, and it can manage credit cards that you might have with the bank. And when it can't fulfill a request, the AI then connects the user with a human banker via text messages, phone call, whatever the user provides or prefers. And it actually they've created their own voice. This is their own sort of custom voice AI. And the woman's voice that users hear was synthesized from a voice actor recording in the studio. So imagine the complexity to this, but they've done it. It's there, it's custom, and it's conversational. The AI that supports the assistant, and here's an interesting part of the use case. It's designed to act as a guide. In addition to doing all those tasks, it acts as a guide, and it helps users find and learn how to use all these features, up to like 300 that US Bank has built into their mobile app. So it's an interface, but it's been, it's the use case is to add convenience, for the US Bank user in terms of these different tasks, but also guides them to show all the other potential that this new app has, with the goal of like most people getting into voice, and what we're all looking for really is more convenience, but also more efficiency. And an interesting backstory here is that the U.S. Bank used people, with a range of sensory, cognitive, and other disabilities, and involved them throughout the development of the voice assistant. And they took part in the pilot programs. And their chief digital officer commented that designing for disability results in a better product, not just for the disabled, but for everyone. And it's a very thoughtful idea. It applies to voice, but it applies a lot of what we're designing too. So it's just a really interesting thing to keep in mind. Another category which is been very engaged in voice for a while is automotive, and voice assistants are projected to be embedded in nearly 90% of new vehicles. They're sold globally by 2028. And probably a great example on the luxury end is Hey Mercedes. It's part of Mercedes-Benz's user experience. They call it MBUX. They're an infotainment system, and it's been launched in its latest A-class vehicles, and it's spreading across the rest of the Mercedes lineup. And specifically, it's a feature of what they call their linguatronic voice recognition system. What can it do? It's can handle requests, about the vehicle systems, so that it's like a living manual, and it can process those locally, so that if there's any question you have about the car, or you see a certain light come on, you basically, you can ask, Hey Mercedes, and but you can also ask if you ask about sports cores or stock prices or gas station locations. The service reaches out to a cloud platform to retrieve the latest information. So it can be contained in terms of sort of information about the vehicle, but then it can also go outside the vehicle. And importantly, it allows drivers to talk naturally, as they would to another person. And they're able to ask for things like, say things naturally and get a response like, I'm hungry, or I'm cold. And you don't have to tell it what temperature you want. It'll just start cooling it off. The I'm hungry, it will trigger options that you're going to have to, what are the closest restaurants or places you could get something to eat. It can also support some more advanced queries, that would take advantage of those cloud-based services. And you can even buy concert tickets if you heard something on the radio about a concert, or even pre-ordering coffee so that it's at Starbucks, that's a couple of miles down the road. And the goal is to integrate the voice assistant even more naturally into the overall experience of the car. So, users can smoothly switch back and forth between touch controls and voice command. It's very fluid. So that's, and the Mercedes introduced this over a year ago. In terms of something more recent, I don't think anyone who's been watching golf or tennis recently could have missed the Buick Alexa TV commercials announcing Alexa's incorporation into the infotainment system of the Buick Encore GX. And for those who haven't seen it, who haven't been watching TV, it introduces that Alexa is now embedded within the Buick Encore GX, and the people in the spot start referring to the car, the vehicle, as Alexa. So it certainly gets the point across, but it's when you stop and think, it's a pretty big deal. It's going to have the same functionality, as the Mercedes assistant in a way, but also Alexa will be able to do everything in your car that you do at home. So drivers will be able to control lights or climb into their home, or even add items to their Amazon shopping cart. So this, is a real advancement, and it's part of the GMC plan to bring this sort of advanced voice interface throughout its Chevrolet, Buick, GMC, and Cadillac lines. So 2028 is getting closer and closer, and this is what you're going to see. So in terms of, this is why we're talking about this. It's coming, and it's expected, and it's pretty advanced. Another area that's interesting and really sort of thought-provoking in terms of how is voice going beyond maybe the device that you have on your kitchen counter to listen to music is wearables. And wearables is another area where voice is being incorporated into the product's form and function in different ways. So that one of the most comprehensive examples here is Amazon's Echo wearable ecosystem. So this includes the Echo Loop Smart Ring, Echo frames for eyeglasses, Echo earbuds, all of them with AI, with an Alexa interface. So you're talking. It's basically it's the ultimate in wearables. You're basically going to be able to talk. In essence, your body's your interface. And in terms of what we think of as maybe early stage players, people that are just beginning to fully get into it, is healthcare. And Orbita is a leader in using sort of AI, the power of AI to drive virtual health assistants in ways to engage patients and improve outcomes and reduce costs. They've developed HIPAA-eligible Alexa skills, which is no mean feat. And they also use a SaaS platform to create AI-powered voice and chat applications that allow them to make them available across mobile and chat and IVR and web. So I think there's a really good possibility that the application of voice to address COVID issues currently could propel more activity among healthcare, IT, and pharma companies to apply platforms like Orbita to enhance healthcare delivery and potentially make it more accessible and frankly more economic. Media is an area that is slowly advancing into using voice as an interface. I mean, many of us use the voice interface to surf Netflix to see what's going on, and instead of using the hand control. But the BBC has done something almost as far-reaching as US Bank. The BBC wanted to build its own customer-branded voice assistant, so shape its own enterprise assistant, because they wanted full control over the experience, the customer relationships, and importantly, to control their customers, their users' data. So they teamed up with Microsoft Azure Cognitive Services and Azure the bot service to create an end-to-end customized digital voice assistant. And it captures the brand identity of BBC. It starts to establish more of a conversational relationship with its audiences. And just in June, they launched a voice assistant called Beeb, B-E-E-B, that lets users interact with the broadcaster. In essence, they talk to the BBC, and in essence, it begins this sort of a collaborative relationship, if you will, a conversational relationship with the BBC audience. And to start, it's offering conversational content discovery of their audio platform, which is vast, and it allows users to ask about content, what they might have, that it would be interesting to them, by using their voice. They're not using a mouse or a touchscreen, or they're searching all the different files. They're actually using a conversational interface to find, what might be important to them in this huge backlog of BBC programming. That's a big deal. They created their own enterprise conversational interface that simulates you're having a conversation with the BBC. Another area that's entering voice, driven by the severity of the situations we're in, is hospitality. And driven by COVID, like hotels are looking for ways to address customer concerns about COVID and probably lingering concerns about the safety of rooms and the safety of surfaces within hotel rooms. A great example is the California-based Viceroy hotel chain. It's seeking to reduce physical touch points in their rooms by rolling out voice-activated digital assistants like Alexa and Google Home. And guests can use these voice interfaces to control the lighting and operate the television, and while avoiding touching light switches and remote controls. And Google, is partnering, going even beyond this, and partnering with Valera to provide global solutions for hotels to deploy fully contactless engagement and touchless room controls, interactions with the front desk, basically avoiding the surfaces as much as possible to address the needs of the guests. So it's almost taking what China is doing to elevators and applying that to minimizing contact with surfaces within hotel rooms. So, as aspects of those are, as you get the sense of, there's diverse form factors that are currently being used, and explored, most overtly by the wearables that we talked about. But there's the potential, I think you get a sense of, the form factors aren't limited to the home speakers, or smartphones, that new form factors can be unique and diverse now, as will the experiences that we have for each. It's, they can offer different forms that can play out in the next 5 years. They're being played out now. There's, a huge application is AI-powered call centers. There's the multimodal devices that we're starting to see now with kiosks, and that whole aspect of the sort of the user experience sensitivity to context, clearly applies to kiosks. But really, in terms of all these form factors, context becomes something that's really important, that needs to be anticipated before, early in the design process, in the envisioning process. Wearables and hearables, automated and rideshare. These are all things where it expands the potential of voice into, sort of an environment that surrounds you. Anything can become almost a voice interface, but the key UX issues like context become really, really important. And we're, as a result, designing for both human factors, which is more the ergonomic side, of a device, and just the overall industrial design elements are going to be key in these experiences. But if you can imagine it, it's going to be possible. So needs assessments and usability as a result are going to be directly related to the type of user-device interactions that are imagined. And as we're saying, context of use is going to play a huge role, in the design considerations of the form itself. So, in general, I've been using the term conversational a lot, and the virtual assistants are really becoming capable, of sort of multi-step conversations. The original skills and actions that we've had for the past 4+ years, have been very task driven. And as you see in the Alexa, you can ask Alexa, you'll be able to ask Alexa certain things both within the Buick, or you can ask Alexa to make sure that the lights are on when you get home. But as we've been talking about conversational AI, there's more of that back and forth of actually talking, the back and forth experience of talking to a person. So as users are becoming accustomed to using conversational devices, and they're learning that a conversational user interface is an intuitive way of interacting, with digital channels. But and that user consumer experience with skills and actions, is propelling us and making people more ready for what we're calling more conversational AI, and that's that more human-like engagement. It's where assistants feel much like holding an actual conversation with another human being, and the dialogue is more natural, with context remembered throughout. So in terms of the original task-driven skills and actions, they've been task-driven. They're based on user requests, answers, and these are the skills and actions we've gotten to know over the last 3 to 4 years. And they normally answer basic questions. They draw from a big database. They execute well-defined tasks. They've got dialogue abilities that can gather essential information, what's called slot filling, to complete a task. But there tends to be not much sense of memory or context. And we're evolving towards conversational AI. What I've got over on the right, where this is that custom voice systems with interactions that imitate the back and forth of talking with another person. That's like what we saw with US Bank and the BBC. Now there's movement from the skills and actions closer to conversational AI, with things like Alexa conversations and Alexa skill resumption, which were just introduced earlier this summer in beta form, and with like Alexa conversations creates more natural feeling Alexa skills with fewer lines of code. It's a new AI-driven approach to what's called dialogue management that lets you create skills that customers can use to interact with in a more natural, less constrained way. And if you're going to just design these on your own, it would be crazy complex. But what they've done is they've created sample dialogues, in essence, frameworks that you can use to create ideal dialogue paths and templates. And the AI then guides the dialogue, and content management to include things like carry on context, across different turns and so forth. And so that, once again, it's getting closer to that back and forth of true conversation. There's another beta that was released for Alexa this summer called skill resumption. And this provides what's called backgrounding and foregrounding. This lets a user ask for an Uber, while the ride is being ordered, and while the ride's being ordered, they can multitask. They can use Alexa for other things like, asking for the weather while they wait. And that the skill stays open in the background, and it's brought back to the foreground when the Uber arrives. Get it? Background and foreground. And this removes the need to sort of re-invoke the skill or start it over, which you would have had to do in the past. So together, advances like these are bringing us closer to true conversational AI. And once again, it's that interaction that simulates it, feels more like the back and forth of talking with another person. And right now, this is available through custom voice systems that are being created for enterprise uses, like with US Bank and BBC. And and they have abilities like contextual follow-up, where the agent can remember things of importance. The information is then used to create very natural, personalized, and human-like conversations. The assistant has the capability of disambiguation. What does that mean? It means that when the agent is uncertain how to proceed, it asks questions that has the user provide more direction. They have the capability of interruption and resumption. The conversation can be interrupted. The assistant answers the questions and then resumes the original conversation. It's not unlike the backgrounding and foregrounding that I just described for that Alexa skill resumption. The system is capable of dynamic answers. That means that it can give answers based on topics of previous discussions. That aspect of memory, is new, and was not available to any significant amount with skills and actions before, but it's coming. And and it also is here now with custom enterprise conversational AI platforms. And finally, handling multiple questions. The user can ask more than one question in a single input. Right now it would blow your Google Home or your Alexa's mind because it can't handle that much, but it is arriving there, and it's available through conversational AI enterprise platforms. But all these together, it's like talking with a person. It's that back and forth, and it's leading. Imagine this capability then, leading to the potential of voice everywhere interactions. It's the direction that experiences are headed in the next 5 years. So together with the different form factors in this movement towards conversational, on the go voice interactions will, inherently need to solve for a lot of different privacy and usability concerns. So think of it like while using voice features on the go, it has many advantages, but it also will require public use of them will require a lot of guardrails and protections that we need to anticipate. These are UX concerns. And the use of skills for personal data and account access, will need to be very carefully thought out. If you're giving credit card numbers or things like that, the ways to input have to be designed to protect the user. And as we've been talking, without visual affordances, biometrics will probably need to be leveraged, so that that there's a way to interact with the system in a way that includes more of your body. And designing for a comfortable and seamless voice experience outside of the home, is going to be key to these on-the-go product successes. And frankly, once again, back to context, which is a theme, a UX theme that is critical to taking advantage of all the potential of voice interfaces. Environmental factors, the context, like noise levels, being surrounded by others and moving around while you're interacting. These are all examples of elements that need to be designed for, early on in the process, that need to inform design. And once again, context is an aspect of UX that's critical to voice interface success.
So with the expansion of natural language understanding via conversational interfaces and the immersion of so many new form factors, many of which will have critical environmental considerations, as Dan points out, it's important for us to think about how to make sure experiences are useful, usable, and desirable. Because as you can imagine, when you add in all of these very complex contextual, environmental, and interaction-based complications, you could either have a great experience or you could have a pretty disastrous experience. And, research is key. It's key in the voice design process, and voice user experience research is critical at a couple of different points in your product roadmap. So taking a look at this image here, this is what we consider to be the product life cycle. And ultimately, UX research helps to shape voice experiences. But UX looks a lot different when you don't have a visual interface that you're testing and designing for. So UX guides design by identifying pain points in the interaction, common issues with the utterances, and challenges with the environment, or needs based on context or mental models of using apps or websites, just to name a few elements. In the product lifecycle, UX research comes in at 2 key points. You can think of it as the bookends of the voice product development process. So first, during discovery research, UX research can identify needs or opportunities before an experience is even designed. We can test very early phase prototypes or use Wizard of Oz methods to simulate an experience not yet created to understand how or what users might need to accomplish. This discovery or foundational research ultimately informs the UI design. During development, voice designers ultimately create skill or action experiences through coding, and developers conduct rapid automated testing to identify both common and uncommon errors. And finally, once a prototype, beta version, or final live concept is available for testing, we use formative or validation usability testing and contextual testing. Notice I say and there, because you always need to test in the environment to understand what the experience is like and what further design changes and iterations might need to be made to make the experience even better. Earlier, we mentioned the importance of looking at the voice experience from the user's point of view and assessing the influence of context, intention, and expectation. It's really important to understand that context and environment from the user's point of view, because verbal communication is often significantly influenced by where the user happens to be and the situation we're in. So let's think about context in a few different ways. First is environmental factors, like the presence of other people or ambient sounds when the interaction with the voice assistant is most likely to occur. It also might take into account whether or not the user is going to be inside or outside. For example, are they going to be in a home environment, potentially with their spouse working from home next door? None of us have experienced that recently. Or potentially in a gym or a retail environment. Context also might include considering mobile usage. So with the introduction of voice user interfaces like wearables, ranging from watches to sunglasses, and the activity level, as well as locations of use, the possibilities are endless, but as you can imagine, there are a lot of variables that enter in that, while can initially be tested in lab, also need to be tested in context. The situation the user may be in can also inform design. So an obvious example is driving a car where both attention and gaze of the user must be fixed elsewhere, making the directness and efficiency of the interaction incredibly important for safety standards. The ecosystem of the VUI that the VUI will be interacting within is also a huge design consideration. So ecosystems are increasing in complexity alongside of a lot of the other elements that we've talked about. So using the automotive example again, could the ecosystem contain another voice-enabled interface like OnStar? The home is probably the most commonly researched in terms of ecosystems, since smart homes frequently have multiple voice user interfaces. But of course, as things like smart cities enter into our common vocabulary, those ecosystems are going to increase in complexity, and testing will need to accommodate for that. Intention really refers to understanding what the user wants to accomplish through the use of the assistant. So some of the most used early Alexa skills were based on recipes and designed to be accessed while cooking. So the VUI could guide the users through the steps of a new recipe while their eyes and hands are busy chopping ingredients or whisking away. Now things are increasing complexity as well. So financial skills and actions can, help the user perform getting their account balance, recent purchases, or authorizing payments. And as we've seen, those intentions may be brought into new use cases as well. Expectation describes how the user assumes the voice agent will work, and this could mean delivering on the use case that the user has been led to expect. And now with advances in skills and conversational templates that make conversational engagements more within reach for the developer, setting expectations becomes really important to avoid overpromise. So UX discovery research can help guide design by getting into the wild and coming back with a sense of context, intention, and expectation to inform user scenarios and use cases. I'm not going to go into automated testing because I realize that we're hitting the top of the hour, but just know that automated testing is really important for developers to identify errors and issues as they're developing out the code for the back end of a voice experience. What I really do want to make sure we hit on is that user testing is really, really important for both formative and validation research once a product is able to be tested either in an early prototype beta or a live form. It's really the most critical way to shape a voice experience because you're identifying issues and risks that may not be apparent in the design and won't surface during the traditional system testing. I think also what's really critical is to get away from testing within your organization. So making sure that you're doing user testing with people far outside the build team. They should be the kind of people that are actually going to interact with the voice user interface. And user testing can simulate the context and situation either in the lab, it can be done in the environment where it will be experienced. And of course, it can also be conducted remotely, which we've been doing a lot of during COVID. So voice And building a voice plan into your 5-year plan is really what we hope that you all got out of this webinar. Advances are making voice a more common and expected interface. Voice really is convenient, efficient, and increasingly intuitive, and we provided a variety of examples of that in this webinar. We want to identify where voice addresses a business case, though. Voice for voice's sake is not the route that we would recommend going. A lot of it is on that early discovery end, identifying what needs your users have. Where do you need to come in and help solve for a problem or answer a question that they might have? That's where voice can really come in to provide an amazing experience for your customers. And lastly, UX research can help support your VUI development. So through foundational research, service design, and evaluative research, it really helps shape the voice experience through user input. And as you develop this new experience in your product roadmap and ecosystem, put yourself in the customer's shoes. Let their pain points and needs guide the direction you take your voice roadmap in the next 5 years. And lastly, in addition to Ipsos-led research, many of our examples came from across the industry and some of the amazing work that's being done in the voice space. If you want to take a deeper dive, we'll make sure that those links and resources are available here in the final presentation that will be shared out to you. And thank you so much for your time. I'm sure we got a ton of questions, and looking at the chat, it looks like we did. And I'm so sorry we're not going to be able to get to them, but Dan and I will take the time and make sure we respond to each question individually and get you as many resources as we possibly can. So just thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for your time and your attention. Take care.
Thanks, Dan and Megan. Wow, you really jam-packed a lot into today's presentation, and so I'm sure each of you joining us today are looking forward to receiving a copy of today's recorded presentation. And as I said, that will be emailed out and most likely tomorrow. In the meantime, please feel free to reach out to us with any follow-up questions. That now concludes today's webinar. Have a wonderful day.